Before Tartarus, movement could always negotiate. Nothing ever committed to a direction long enough to be trapped. Even descent was temporary. If something moved downward, it could still stop. It could drift sideways. It could dissolve into elsewhere. There was no motion that promised continuation, no action that insisted on completion. Falling existed only as a suggestion, a possibility that never finished itself. Then Tartarus already existed, not as darkness, not as punishment, but as an absolute below, and once below becomes absolute. Movement changes because falling is no longer a phase, it becomes a commitment. A motion that does not ask permission to end. This episode is not about pain. It is about the moment motion loses its exit. About why descent stops being reversible. Because when escape disappears, falling is no longer movement. It is a sentence that finishes itself. Tartarus does not pull. There is no force reaching upward from it. Nothing drags bodies down. Nothing accelerates the fall. Gravity has not yet been defined. What changes is not strength. It is certainty. Once an absolute below exists. Any downward motion inherits directionality. Not because Tartarus attracts, but because there is now a place that movement cannot pass through. Before this, motion could scatter. Now it must resolve. Falling gains an end condition, and that end does not dissolve. It remains waiting. Every descent now knows where it is going, even if nothing is pushing it.
Terminal state, spatial end condition.
This is why escape disappears. Not because walls appear, but because continuation replaces choice. A fall does not need barriers. It only needs a place that will not let motion renegotiate itself. Tartarus is that place. And once it exists, movement learns what it means to not return. Before Tartarus, mistakes could not exist. Because nothing stayed misplaced, any deviation dissolved back into flow. Errors were temporary distortions. They never accumulated. They never remained long enough to be named. But once falling gains an endpoint, deviation acquires duration. A wrong direction can now persist, not because it is wrong, but because it cannot escape itself. This is the birth of irreversibility. Not as punishment, not as judgment, but as structure. Falling becomes the first motion that does not forgive itself. Because forgiveness requires return, and return no longer exists. From this moment on, movement can commit errors simply by continuing. No intention is required. No will is involved. A body only needs to move downward far enough, and the universe will refuse to give it back. This is why Tartarus matters. It turns direction into destiny. Falling is not speed, it is alignment. To fall is to align with a direction that cannot be interrupted. Before this, motion had exits everywhere. Now one direction has none. The absence of escape does not feel like force. It feels like inevitability. A fall does not accelerate emotionally. It simply continues structurally. And continuation without exit is indistinguishable from trap. This is how escape disappears without walls. There is no enclosure, only completion. Once a motion knows where it ends, stopping becomes impossible without reversal, and reversal is no longer available. This is the difference between movement and falling. Movement can stop. Falling cannot, because falling is movement that has lost its alternatives. Tartarus removes alternatives from below, and the universe begins to understand that not all paths are equal. Some directions close themselves behind you. Nothing in Tartarus reacts. It does not respond to arrival. It does not register impact. There is no surface to collide with, only depth that accepts without change. This matters because resistance has not yet appeared. There is no force to push back. Falling does not end with impact. It ends with placement. A thing is not damaged when it reaches Tartarus. It is simply located beyond retrieval. This is why falling becomes terrifying later. Not now. Now it is purely structural. A location that does not allow return creates loss without violence. Nothing breaks, nothing suffers, but something is gone. The universe experiences its first subtraction, not through destruction, but through inaccessibility. What falls is not destroyed. It is removed from participation. And this is more permanent than breaking, because broken things can sometimes be repaired. Lost things cannot. At this stage, there is still no consciousness, no fear, no awareness of loss. Yet structure already behaves as if consequence matters. Falling removes elements from interaction. What cannot return cannot influence what remains. This introduces a symmetry. Before, everything could still affect everything else eventually. Now some things exit the system permanently. This is how imbalance begins. Not through conflict, but through disappearance from relevance. Tartarus creates an accounting problem. The universe can no longer assume total participation. Some motions lead out of the equation forever. This is the earliest form of consequence, not punishment, not moral judgment, but subtraction from future interactions. Once this exists, Structures must adapt. They must account for loss. Even if no one knows it yet, even if nothing feels it yet, the universe has crossed a threshold it cannot uncross. Falling without escape introduces time differently. Before, duration had no cost. Nothing became more final by continuing longer. Now continuation increases commitment. The longer a fall proceeds, the less possible reversal becomes. Time gains weight through motion, not because clocks exist, but because persistence now matters. This is the first hint that time can accumulate meaning. A moment is no longer isolated. It carries forward its direction. Falling teaches the universe that sequence can trap. Earlier states become unreachable simply by passing through them. This is why escape vanishes silently. No barrier announces itself.
History sealing behind motion.
No boundary is marked. Only the past becomes inaccessible. And once the past cannot be revisited, correction becomes impossible. Not because the universe refuses, but because structure no longer allows it. At this point, Gaia still exists without tension. She endures, but nothing presses against her yet. However, falling changes how existence distributes itself. What falls does not remain above. Weight begins to imply absence elsewhere. Even without gravity, even without pressure, the system is no longer neutral. Loss below means imbalance above. Gaia does not feel this yet, but structure has already prepared the condition. Falling removes content from interaction with ground. What remains must occupy space differently. This is how pressure will later appear, not suddenly, but as an accumulation of what did not fall. Tartarus does not create force directly. It creates vacancy. And vacancy reshapes what remains. This is why falling matters beyond the fall itself. It reorganizes existence without touching it. Mistakes are not yet defined, but irreversibility is already present. A mistake will later mean something that cannot be undone. That definition requires a place without return. Tartarus provides it. Without Tartarus, error would dissolve. With Tartarus, error persists simply by continuing. A wrong step does not need intent. Only alignment with an irreversible direction. This is why falling is the template for mistake. Not because it hurts, but because it cannot be corrected. Correction requires return to a previous state. Return no longer exists for certain motions. The universe now contains paths that close behind you. Even if nothing chooses them consciously. This is the silent birth of tragedy. Not as emotion, but as structure, a system where not all errors can be fixed. Nothing observes the fall. There is no witness, no memory being formed. Yet structure behaves as if memory exists, because irreversibility functions like memory without awareness. Once something is gone, future states are different forever. This difference cannot be erased, even if nothing recalls it. The universe now carries history structurally, not as record, but as limitation. Future configurations must work around what is no longer available. This is how history begins without minds. Falling creates absence. Absence constrains what can come next. Constraint accumulates silently. And accumulation will later become tension. Gaia will feel this eventually. But for now, structure is only preparing the condition. The universe is becoming less flexible, one fall at a time. Falling also introduces hierarchy of directions. Before, no direction mattered more than another. Now, downward is privilege, not because it is stronger, but because it is final. Finality creates hierarchy automatically. Paths that close are more decisive than paths that remain open. This reshapes movement globally. Any system containing an irreversible direction becomes asymmetric. Balance becomes fragile, not yet broken, but no longer guaranteed. The universe now contains preferred outcomes, not chosen, but enforced by structure. This is why escape disappears universally once Tartarus exists. Even motions that never approach it are affected, because possibility itself has narrowed. The universe has fewer ways to resolve itself than before. There is still no struggle, no resistance, no collision. Yet consequence already exists. Consequence without suffering, loss without damage. Falling teaches the universe that outcomes can be final without violence. This is more dangerous than destruction, because destruction implies force, and force implies opposition. But Tartarus requires none of that. It removes without contest. It takes without conflict. What falls simply stops being relevant to what remains. This introduces inevitability without drama. And inevitability is the most rigid structure possible. Once inevitability exists, repair becomes conditional. Not everything can be fixed. Not everything can return. The universe has learned restraint without choosing it. At this stage, Tartarus is still empty of meaning. It has no myth, no name beyond location. But structure does not require interpretation to function. Falling already reshapes existence regardless of awareness. This is important because later narratives will mistake cause for intent. They will imagine Tartarus as punishment. But here, it is only geometry, a below that does not negotiate. The universe is becoming layered, not morally, but spatially and temporally. Some places allow return. One place does not. That difference is enough to change everything. No God decrees it. No law enforces it.
Structure existing without authority.
It simply exists, and existence adapts around it.
System status, unrecoverable.
Falling without escape also limits repair indirectly.
Pre-civilization.
Repair requires access to what was lost. If access is denied, repair becomes impossible regardless of intent. This is why tragedy will later feel unavoidable. Not because events are cruel, but because structure disallows correction. Once a fall passes a threshold, the previous state is unreachable. Even perfect knowledge would not help. The universe now contains states that cannot be revisited. This is the first time possibility shrinks instead of expands. Earlier, new forms added options. Now some motions remove options permanently. The universe has begun to close doors behind itself, and it does not yet know how many it will close. Gaia still holds everything that remains, but what remains is no longer complete. Each fall subtracts from what rests upon her. She endures without reaction. Yet endurance alone will not remain neutral forever. Accumulated absence changes distribution. Distribution will later become pressure. Pressure will later become tension. But for now, the only change is structural imbalance. Not felt, not expressed. Only encoded in arrangement. This is why Tartarus precedes conflict in the canon. Conflict requires stakes. Stakes require irreversibility. Irreversibility begins here, with falling that does not come back. Nothing tries to escape yet, because nothing understands loss yet. But escape has already been removed as a possibility. This is the most important transition. The universe no longer guarantees reversibility by default. Some motions will always be one way from now on. This sets the template for later suffering, without introducing suffering itself. Structure is laying groundwork without emotion. When minds appear later, they will inherit this condition unknowingly. They will call it fate, or punishment, or tragedy, but it will have started here. with a place that simply does not let things return. A below that refuses negotiation by existing. Falling without escape does not end the episode. It completes a condition. The universe now contains permanent loss as a structural possibility. Not everything that exists will continue to participate. Some things will exit interaction forever. This knowledge is not conscious yet. But structure already behaves as if it matters. What remains must adapt to what is missing. Adaptation will later create strain. Strain will later demand release. But for now, the system only tightens silently. Nothing breaks yet. Nothing resists yet. But something has become irreversible. And irreversibility cannot be undone by adding more structure. Once falling becomes irreversible, loss stops being temporary, and when loss is permanent, mistakes acquire weight, not as moral failure, but as states that cannot be corrected. The universe now contains outcomes that must be lived with, even if no one lives yet. This permanence does not remain isolated in Tartarus. It propagates upward through structure. What cannot return below changes how what remains above must behave. Gaia will soon stop being neutral endurance. Because permanence forces accumulation, accumulation forces tension, and tension demands resolution. The next episode is not about falling. It is about what permanence does to existence itself, about why some errors can never be fixed, and how structure begins to remember what it has lost.